Good afternoon, students. We are looking at essay technique and especially evaluation, little analogy of building an essay, crisp and accurate definitions, 1 point per paragraph, and strong examples, evidence and diagrams. In the best essays, students evaluate as they go, but we can build up to that. Let's get our evaluative conclusions better first. Just a rough outline of an economic essay, brief introduction, maybe a key definition, but using some key terms and examples of how you're going to apply, setting the scene. First paragraph, point, agreeing with the statement in the question, evidence and explaining. Second paragraph, the other side or the disagreement with the statement, again, evidence and explaining, and you will go through EO1, EO2 and EO3 in those. Your further points, as long as there's a balance, you might have another point 3 and point 4, but you should balance it with the two sides. And then your evaluative conclusion, which is what we want to talk about today. This is a little mnemonic which helps students to remember the ways in which you can evaluate. You wouldn't do all of these in an essay, but you may do 2 to 3, 2 really good quality or 3 pretty good quality should get you your evaluation marks. The WE step stands for wider context, efficiency, effectiveness, equity or equality, scope, time, priority or prioritization, size, or sometimes seen as scale and magnitude. Wider context is looking at the bigger themes, so it may be looking at the competitors of a company you're looking at. It might be looking at how monetary policy is affected by fiscal policy. In terms of efficiency, you're looking at productive, allocative and dynamic efficiency and how those may increase more or less. Equity or equality is looking at how different groups of people are affected. Rich and poor tends to be one group, but it could also be male and females, young and old people, and so on. Scope looks at how many people are affected. So is it on a local, a national or an international scale? So you might look at it in just Newcastle, you might look at it as the whole of the UK, but you might look at it as the EU wide. Time is one of the most straightforward ones to use. Is something different, or the effects of it different in the short or the long term? Is low interest rates now have a different effect, or does low interest rates now have a different effect this year than it will in 2 or 3 years time? Effectiveness is looking at relative effectiveness. So in terms of a percentage, is it 0 to 100% effective? This tends to apply to government interventions, so taxes and subsidies. You may say that it's effective 80% of the time, which is still saying that it's effective, but not that it's 100% effective. Prioritization, if you have several solutions, you might have a priority of which one comes first. So your most effective one comes first, or it might be that the priority is dependent, so you can only have 3 if you've also done 1 and 2. Size, again, with time is one of the most straightforward ones. It tends to be so something like a large reduction in interest rates will be more effective than a small reduction. So quite a straightforward one. Those are the ways in which you could evaluate, but the structure of evaluation is key. So it's not enough just to say wider context is how I'm going to evaluate. You need to structure it in. So the evaluation structure we're going to use is the question rephrased to start your conclusion. So if the question is, to what extent is a tax effective in solving a market failure? You would say the extent to which a tax is effective depends upon, and then insert the WE step, which may be time. Because, and then you would say why. So for example, in the short term, demand is inelastic. So it will be less effective in the short term. However, in the long term, people will find substitutes, and this will mean it is more effective. To get even higher, so that's kind of level 1 evaluation, if you do a conditional evaluation, if something happens, therefore, so you could say if the government were to increase the tax to a large extent, it may speed up the process of effectiveness. The last thing you should always do is answer the question specifically. So clearly state with a judgment of what you think. So that can sometimes be using that if. So if the government were to have a large tax, this would make it more effective because it would become elastic more quickly. So the tax will be more effective in the long term. And that clear sentence, which shows judgment, is the best way to end a conclusion. Okay, lastly, a few examples of evaluative paragraphs that could be used to finish an essay. So an example here of equity: the extent to which the rise in VAT will negatively affect people will depend upon their disposable income, because those on lower incomes will be affected more, as 20% on the price of petrol will be a larger percentage of their income relative to someone who earns more. So we've used the phrase depends upon there. We've also used the because, and then we've kind of said why here. Then again, there's some judgment here. Therefore, this price rise would be regressive, falling more heavily on the poor than on the rich, so it will be less effective than a progressive tax. So there's some clear judgment that finishes off that evaluation. The next one uses size and time. The business should raise its prices to maximize its revenue, but this depends upon the size, because if it rises it by a small amount gradually, then the consumers will likely remain unresponsive. Large rise would be noticed and make people more responsive to price changes as they seek substitutes. So again, some clear judgment at the end. And an effectiveness one: the usefulness of PED to a business depends upon how far into the future, should be the, not he, they are predicting. Estimates are more accurate over the short term and with a large amount of past data than in the long term with little. Not quite as strong a judgment, but you still have that it depends upon, just missing the because out of that one, but still kind of another way of doing it.